Hi everyone. In today's presentation, we're going to talk about functional communication. This presentation was created by Dr. Jason Hurst. Dr. Hurst has his Bachelor of Science in Psychology, a master's degree in Applied Behavioral Analysis, and a PhD in Behavioral Psychology. He has been working with children on the autism spectrum since 2011 and has extensive experience working as an educator for children and adults with and without developmental disabilities. Let's get started. In this module, we will review why behavior challenges occur, compare methods that seek to eliminate or replace the behavior, and then introduce a general method for teaching functional communication as that replacement. We'll provide a couple of examples to illustrate how the method works. The exact method for implementing functional communication training can vary depending on your unique circumstances, so you should seek help with designing your intervention from a BCBA. But this training will provide a good foundation for your efforts. All behaviors occur for a reason. If we didn't get something for our efforts, at least sometimes, however seemingly minor the outcome might be, we would see a gradual fading of that behavior. We tend to keep doing the things that work out for us. From the behavioral perspective, we tend to classify behaviors not by what they look like, but according to what purpose they serve. Many behaviors can be understood as an attempt to communicate that we want or need something. When an individual does not have the language skills to simply ask, they have to find another way. Even when a child does have the language to ask, they may have learned that they get what they want more immediately or more reliably when they misbehave compared to asking politely. Behavior analysts have identified 4 common outcomes that serve to maintain the occurrence of challenging behaviors. A behavior can be attention-seeking, meaning that it occurs because it produces some form of attention from others. It's important to note that attention can take lots of forms, including verbal interactions, eye contact, physical proximity, facial expressions, and even less intuitive things like reprimands. A second purpose a behavior might fill is gaining access to physical items, activities, or the option to make choices. A behavior might also serve to escape, delay, or avoid unpleasant tasks, situations, or physical sensations. Last, some behavior occur because of the direct sensory outcomes those behaviors produce, like interesting or stimulating sights, sounds, or feelings. When we understand what the behavior is attempting to achieve, we can teach the individual how to fulfill that need by engaging in a more appropriate behavior. In behavior analysis, there are 3 approaches to reducing the occurrence of behavior challenges. We can implement extinction by withholding the outcome the individual was seeking. We can punish the behavior, or we can teach an alternative method for accomplishing the same outcomes. Extinction refers to withholding or blocking access to the outcome or consequence that the problem behavior usually produces. By breaking the relationship between the behavior and the consequence, that behavior no longer serves a purpose and will gradually fade away. What extinction looks like depends on the specific consequence the problem behavior usually achieves. If the behavior was attention-seeking, then we would withhold that specific form of attention while the problem behavior is occurring. If the behavior seeks to escape an instruction or demand, we can make sure we follow through with our request. And if the behavior occurs to gain access to something, we withhold access to that same thing or event. Sensory consequences are the most difficult to extinguish. Usually, we look to see if we can prevent the sensory sensation from occurring or redirect the behavior before it produces whatever sensation normally occurs. There are some important limitations to the use of extinction to eliminate behavior problems. First, A known result of putting a behavior on extinction is that it often gets worse before it gets better. You've probably observed this effect referred to as an extinction burst before. If you've let an infant cry themselves to sleep after routinely rushing in to pick them up whenever they've cried, you've probably noticed that it went on for a long time and maybe even increased in intensity before it stopped. If you've been waiting for an elevator for a while, you've probably pushed the button a few more times before giving up and taking the stairs. Sometimes parents and teachers are not prepared to deal with this burst and they end up giving in. This presents a big problem because if we do eventually give in and give the child what they want during an extinction burst, now the child has learned that when the behavior doesn't produce what they want right away, they just have to try harder, making it even more difficult to eliminate the behavior in the future. A second limitation is that extinction doesn't eliminate the need the behavior was seeking to meet. Because the need or want is still there, you are likely to see a substitution of another problematic behavior for the first one you were trying to eliminate. You might be surprised how creative children can be when they really want something. If extinction isn't implemented and maintained consistently, a condition called the partial reinforcement effect occurs. This effect describes the observation that behaviors that are only successful sometimes are more resistant to intervention than behaviors that produce the desired outcome very quickly. We are quick to give up on a vending machine that doesn't work the first time because we're used to it working consistently. On the other hand, people will play the lottery or pull the lever on a slot machine hundreds of times without winning because of that rare occasion when they do win. The same thing happens with problem behaviors. If they are even occasionally effective, they will be so much more difficult to fix. Lastly, extinction is no fun. Extinction can produce frustration and other negative emotions that are difficult to handle for all parties involved. Punishment is another option and refers to the active management of behavior problems rather than the more passive withholding of extinction. Formally, punishment refers to the delivery of unpleasant outcomes or the implementation of penalties following behavior to reduce their recurrence. We tend to avoid punishment whenever possible for ethical reasons. If there are other effective and more positive options available, we would choose those over punishment. When punishment is used, it usually produces a response from the child called counter-control. Counter-control refers to the person on the receiving end of punishment often trying to throw punishment back. No one likes to be punished, so you might try to make life more difficult for the person punishing you. Punishment is still a common method for parents because it does tend to work. When punishment procedures reduce unpleasant behaviors, the person using punishment gets to experience a sort of relief. This actually makes it more likely that they will continue using punishment in the future, so that punishment actually becomes a self-reinforcing loop that can quickly escalate out of hand, which is called the punishment trap. Punishment also shares similar side effects as extinction, with negative emotions and emotional responding on both sides. So what's the better option? The problem that extinction and punishment both share is that they only seek to eliminate behavior and not teach what to do instead. They don't eliminate the cause of the behavior in the first place, which was to fulfill some want or need. If we want to tackle the root of the problem, we need to teach how to access reinforcement by engaging in socially acceptable behaviors instead of the original problematic behavior. Whenever a behavior problem seems to be an attempt to communicate a want or a need, the obvious replacement behavior is to engage in some functional communication. The exact form of the communication might vary depending on the skill level of the individual, but we want to teach them to ask for things or otherwise get their needs met. The general formula for functional communication training is to ensure that the behavior problem is no longer successful in achieving the original outcome, but instead, appropriate communication behaviors produce those same outcomes quickly and efficiently, usually with less effort. It's a lot easier to ask for something than throw a full blown tantrum. Once they notice the difference in efficiency, they should become much more likely to communicate rather than resort to their old problematic methods. Functional communication training is based on the principle of differential reinforcement, where one group of behaviors either no longer produces the original reinforcer that used to maintain them, and another group of behaviors is reinforced instead, or they produce more and better reinforcement. This procedure is used widely in behavior analysis to simultaneously reduce the occurrence of behavior problems, but also teach functional replacement skills that address the root or original cause of the problem behavior. Functional communication training is the term we give to the set of interventions where the replacement skill is specifically a communication skill. The process for implementing follows four basic steps. First, we need to figure out why the problem behavior is occurring. What want or need does the behavior fulfill? What usually happens as a result of that behavior, or what do they get out of it? Then we identify a more appropriate way for the person to access the same outcome. We differentially reinforce the communication skill by withholding the consequences the problem behavior was seeking whenever it occurs and using prompting strategies to teach the replacement communication skill, providing the sought consequence for communicating instead. There are several considerations for implementing this strategy, so you should still consider seeking the help of a professional with your specific behavior concern. We can provide a few examples for what functional communication training might look like in practice. First, let's look at an example of functional communication training for an attention-seeking behavior. James sometimes throws a tantrum in order to gain the attention of his parents. For the sake of this example, we know that the behavior occurs to gain attention with the help of a formal assessment conducted by a BCBA. Implementing functional communication training in this example would entail withholding attention following the problem behavior while instead delivering high-quality attention immediately following more appropriate communication responses. We can teach James that when he wants attention, he can ask for it by calling for his mother. It's important that, at least initially, the communication response always produces the attention he's seeking. Over time, his parents can gradually transition to teaching James to accept delays to getting attention or occasionally not getting it if his parents are busy. It's also important that attention is never delivered following the problem behavior. If the appropriate communication is ignored too early or the problem behavior continues to be effective, then the procedure is less likely to succeed. The procedure would be similar for an escape-maintained behavior, except the communication response and the consequence would be matched to the purpose of the problem behavior. Sarah struggles with her schoolwork. She sometimes tears up her worksheets and throws them on the floor. Her BCBA has identified that the behavior occurs because she is able to delay or totally escape from completing the work, In this case, we would want to be sure that Sarah can't escape her work by ripping up the sheets. Maybe we keep a stack handy so we can replace them right away. We would then want to teach her a different way to get a break from doing the work she doesn't like or asking for help when something gets too hard. A common procedure for a nonverbal individual is to use a card that says break, or maybe it has a stop sign on it that the individual can touch or hand to a teacher in order to be allowed to take a quick break from whatever is currently happening. Using the card would result in the teacher immediately giving Sarah a break for a short time because that was what her original problem behavior was accomplishing. And finally, here's an example of functional communication training for a behavior that gains access to things like a snack in this example. Chris runs around the house and whines in the afternoon around snack time. He grabs his parents by the arm and tries to drag them into the kitchen. Now, the BCBA has identified that the reinforcer for this behavior is getting a snack. So you may have guessed by now that we would want to withhold getting snacks when the problem behavior is occurring. A reasonable replacement might be to teach Chris to ask for a snack. We would want to make sure the whining never produces a snack, but asking consistently does, at least at first, until it becomes well established. Then we can start thinking about gradually introducing tolerance for a denied access. Before we can implement functional communication training, we really have to know the function of the behavior. The alternative behavior we are teaching and the consequence it produces must be matched to the cause of the problem behavior. Communication also looks different depending on the skill level. We can use verbal language for some individuals, but others might be dependent on alternative forms of communication. We can teach communication in the form of gestures, sign language, a picture exchange system, or even an augmentative or alternative communication device recommended by a speech pathologist. When we choose the communication response to replace the problem behavior, we want to pick something that will be recognizable by others in the individual's environment. It will be less useful as a behavior if its meaning is a secret only understood by a few people close to the individual. Finally, we don't want to pair teaching with the problem behavior. That is, the occurrence of the problem behavior should not prompt you to implement the teaching strategy. You will want to ignore the problem behavior or follow through with the demands, in the case of escape, until the individual is calm and compliant. If the problem behavior results in you directing them to engage in the communication response, you might inadvertently create a chain of events where the individual thinks that to get what they want, they have to engage in the problem behavior first, then the communication response to get what they want. The alternative response and the problem behavior should be consistently separated by at least some time. One consideration you can put to use right away is to ensure you don't accidentally implement the opposite procedure. It sometimes happens that parents and teachers ignore more appropriate requests only to cave when the behavior escalates to something more irritating or disruptive. If this occurs, then the child will learn that the problem behavior works more consistently than asking appropriately. If you're going to say no, then be consistent and stick it out. If you're going to say yes eventually, you might as well reward the polite and appropriate behavior. Clearly, we can't always say yes. It's important that during the initial stages of functional communication training intervention, that we consistently reinforce the communication response until it becomes well established. Gradually fading how often you reinforce communication comes later. It's likely that when you start to introduce the occasional no into the mix, you'll probably see a resurgence of the problem behavior. Be prepared for it and be consistent. The details of any behavioral intervention need to be individualized to be maximally effective. These tips will hopefully give you an idea for how to manage some common behavior problems, but you'll have a better luck navigating more complex problems with the help from a BCBA. We hope this presentation on functional communication was helpful for you. If you still have questions about this topic and would like more information about our therapy programs, please visit our website where you can schedule a free consultation with one of our clinicians.